Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be in Darwin and a privilege to be here. First up, as with everybody, I think we need to really give thanks to particularly our sponsors. I was jointly sponsored by Nuffield Australia and the GRDC Northern region. I think the special thing about the GRDC is it's completely levy payer funded, and I've never forgotten that, is that I've been essentially sponsored by all grain farmers in Australia who deliver grain, and I thank them for that. Thanks to Warrakirri Cropping, my employer. They've been very flexible, and yeah, it's probably a little more tough going to an employer to take 16 weeks away than it is from a family business. I mean, it's hard in both, but when you've got a structured salary, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but they've been very helpful and very flexible. My family, of course, Brooke's here today. Very proud of her. She, like everybody, we've all had little hurdles along the way. Brooke actually had a stroke and was only released from hospital 10 days before I went away on the GFP, and she bravely kicked me out the door and said, well, you can't fix me, so yeah, get on with it. So I thank her for that, and the kids were very supportive and helped her as well. My farm staff and my global hosts, people have been so friendly and so welcoming everywhere around the world. A bit about me. I've been with Warrakirri Cropping. They're a superannuation funded, Australian superannuation funded corporate with 10 farms around Australia. I think they have a net asset value of around about $290 million now in land. I've been with them this is my 21st year, and my 19th year with them as a farm manager on 2 different farms. Yeah, we're at Lockhart, as Michael said. Yeah, 8,300 hectares. Yeah, it's a reasonably big aggregation locally. Our biggest driver is return to our investor. We target a 7% operating return on capital and a 3% capital gain. But I think the realities of broadacre grain production in the last 10 years is that the flip side's been true. We've actually yeah, averaged 7% capital gain for the last 16 years and probably averaged about a 3% operating return. But look, investors are happy whichever way they get it. So, closing the yield gap. Where is the yield gap? What you see up there on the left-hand side, you've got a yield map from last year's harvest, and on the right-hand side, we've got an electromagnetic EM38 image. The green areas on the yield map up there represent a yield range from 4.6 to 6.1 tonnes per hectare. The red range in there, 0.1 to 1.3 tonnes per hectare. That's quite a gap. I'd like to fill that. The right hand is a soil image, as I said, EM38, and you can see there's some pretty good correlation between our soil types and our zones. It's a handy piece of gear, but it tells us where our relative soil changes are. But there's lots of unknowns going on in the background. There's chemical, physical, topographical and climatic variables going on. All of these factors contribute to how much water a soil can store and how much it can give back to the crop. Sorry. So what is plant available water capacity? Well, essentially it's the soil water bucket. It's how much water we can store for a certain crop in a certain soil. Soil characterisation is a trusted technique to use to quantify plant available water capacity, but it's expensive, it's slow, and it's site and crop specific. Often it'll take 2 years to get a soil characterised for one crop type, and essentially around about $10,000 per site. So my Nuffield topic was about trying to find a better way. And with 8,000 hectares of highly variable soils, yeah, there was a lot of potential return for my employer and a lot of satisfaction for me if I could find a better way. So where have I been? Don't want to trump Robbie, but 11 farms, 48 flights, 16 weeks. It's too much. Don't try and do that. Very tiring. but fantastic, a very unique opportunity. The China Global Focus, where we were hosted by Michael here, was fascinating. Included Singapore, Philippines, and in particular IRI, the International Rice Research Institute, and all of the GFPs essentially went to one major international research institute, and they're fascinating places, as well as Hong Kong and China. China surprised me. I've seen the figures, how much grain China produces. Yeah, trying to find some quality grain in China, that was a bit of a different issue. We went to a flour mill, and they have the windows above the flour mill where the grain moves down into the roller mill, and the weevils were waving through the window. Help! Save me! It was horrible stuff. But essentially they dry their grain on roads. They sweep up the stones with the grain, and it all ends up in the mix. Yeah, you might have seen yesterday with our GFP presentation, we found in Inner Mongolia, the wheat crops there, that yeah, the aphids, there were 50 aphids per wheat head. I'd never seen aphids in a wheat head, but they've got some big challenges. But you know, if they get their act together, they're going to produce a lot of grain, and you know, they're trying to improve. My visits and my personal studies, yeah, I've included agricultural research institutes, service providers, and many farm visits. Farmers are very friendly wherever you go. The power of social media. I could tweet a photo of where I'm going to be tomorrow on a map and have 5 messages within an hour saying, come and visit me. Fantastic technology these days, and it makes the world a much smaller place. Learnings. Here I am in the Mato Grosso region in Brazil. Yeah, very contrasting environment to home. It's actually the same latitude as we're at right now. Yeah, in Australia, most of our grain crops are planted following a very hot, dry summer and are harvested in spring. In most temperate parts of the world, the main crop growth starts in spring. They're either planted prior to winter or in the spring on a full profile of soil moisture and harvested in the autumn after growing through summer. So we're starting from a very dry bucket, and generally everyone else is starting from a pretty full bucket. So often the challenge around the world isn't storing the water, but instead draining it. The concept of using the soil as a water reservoir for dry periods was pretty poorly understood in the main. If it was too dry anywhere, they just used irrigation. So what do you mean about storing soil moisture? So the channel we're standing there, on the other side of that is a dryland rice crop, which I was, wow, you can actually grow dryland rice. Yeah, 1,800 mil annual rainfall within a 9-month period. If they had 14 days without rain, they screamed drought. Their crops would wilt. It was a pretty warm environment, as like Darwin is. But in essence, they only had use of the top 20 centimetres of their soil. The pH below that top 20 centimetres was too hostile for roots to grow into. So they were losing moisture and nutrient through the profile and draining it back into the river. So, you know, as well, if Brazil gets their act together on things like that, they will become a superpower, or they already are. They'll become better at what they're already doing. The other observation from around the world is that policy and regulation do distract a lot of overseas farmers from their key performance indicators. So, yeah, it's there we are standing in a beautiful black soil field in the Gulf region in Texas. We spent the morning talking about the agronomics of growing organic rice. We had lunch with the local insurance agent, and the rest of the day was all about how we could get the best insurance claim. So that crop has now been washed out by a hurricane, and lo and behold, they've got a non-organic rice yield claim at an organic rice price. So, you know, there's just no incentive there for them to improve what they're doing, which was pretty sad, because it was some of the nicest soil I'd seen anywhere in the world. It exceeded the Darling Downs as far as I was concerned. So what it means is the wrong crops are being produced for the wrong reasons, with the security of external government and community support, and they don't care about the plant available water capacity. EM38 is a great start point anywhere in the world for trying to define soil zones, as in my earlier slide. What you're looking at there in the image is a picture from Craig McKenzie at Methven in New Zealand. He's a Nuffield scholar. He was a 2016 Precision Farmer of the Year and a strong advocate of EM and uses it as a basis for what you call variable rate irrigation. So if you can see the different colours there on that centre pivot, the blue areas on the next watering, they're going to get 15 mils of water. The yellow areas are going to get nil, and yeah, the other areas will be slightly between. So he's used electromagnetic survey to find the sandy soils and the clay soils. He knows where it will get too wet if he waters, and he knows where he needs to water more. So it's useful in an irrigation sense where you can control that water input. There are now commercially available tractor-mounted EM units, which will mean that you can map your EM every time you pass the field. And the one I've seen out of Austria has 7 different zones on the EM, so you may be able to gain some information about relative soil moisture with each tractor passed. But it won't quantify PAWC or plant available water capacity on its own. Yeah, EM's complicated by many factors. On to Israel, and yeah, I had a look at plant stress monitoring and how they do things in a basically totally irrigated environment as well. The unit there that I've got my finger in, that actually clamps onto a plant stem, be it cotton, corn, anything like that. The graph above was being streamed in live from Texas, from a centre pivot in Texas, and that was on cotton plants. If you can see the line graph up here, that represents the daily shrink swell cycle of a plant stem. And down the bottom here you've got your soil moisture. You can tell when there's been an irrigation event because it climbs, and you'll see that it smooths out the shrink swell pattern of the stem. So essentially they can monitor the plant to tell when it's at a point in time where it needs water, it's stressed. Great in irrigation again. I think in a dryland environment, it's got potential for us to actually monitor plants between different soil zones to find out which ones are stressing first. So it may have some application, some usefulness as a technology down the track. So yeah, that was Israel. Onto the USA, had the pleasure of a visit to Texas A&M University with Nuffield friend Kyle Amos, and we got to visit Dr. Christine Morgan there, who was very passionate about soil science, fantastic and dynamic lady, really worth visiting if you're over there. So she introduced me to the concept of using NIR probes to test soil on site. And essentially this can give you basically a 3D view of the subsoil. So it's using NIR in the mid and near visible wavelengths, and the probe will also measure electrical conductivity and soil penetration pressure. So you test the soil, and through the use of some very clever statistics and some mathematics, they use a process which is called external parameter orthogonalization, or EPO. EPO allows them to basically take out the influence of water in the soil sample. They'll then compare the in situ test to the global soil library. So the global soil library contains 40,000 different soil types that have all been ground and oven dried and then subjected to an NIR test. So essentially what you can do is compare something you've tested in situ to a soil that's already been characterised somewhere in the world and give yourself a relative soil type on that basis without the intrusiveness of having to extract cores and do a lot of work. It's a quick and efficient way of doing it. So the unit there has just been commercialised by the Veris company, that's the P4000, and yeah, hopefully we'll get one of them in Australia at some point and we can do some testing work with it. On to Canada, and Mike Wallenberg in Canada has got a startup company, Skaha Remote Sensing, with Steve Larocque as an aside. He's using active microwaves to give himself some soil moisture maps. We use passive microwave sensing at the moment from satellite platforms. Occasionally you'll see pictures in the press of relative soil moisture between countries or regions from satellite. That's basically a passive signal, which every molecule on Earth has a signature, a microwave signature, and they can actually monitor the surface moisture from space. Unfortunately, they can't see what's below the surface. To do that, you actually need an active microwave signal. So what Make's done is he has set up microwave units on a centre pivot there. He's actually beaming the microwave signal into the soil, and he's collecting the data that comes back, the reflected microwave signals that come back. It's still work in progress and very much a startup. It has the potential to measure up to 1 metre deep. It has the potential to be fitted to machinery as we're passing through the paddock in a dryland situation. And it's also given us the potential that one day we might be able to map the residual moisture at harvest, so we can find out where plants haven't taken moisture up. Essentially, that will give us an indication that we may have some soil constraints there that are stopping plants from accessing water. So, on to recommendations. I think as dryland farmers, we need better environmental monitoring systems. I don't think we know enough about what's going into our soil and what's being taken out, particularly moisture. The Internet of Things means we now have access to cheaper sensors and more of them. And there's some high-tech soil measurement solutions that are evolving. So real-time online measurement is now becoming possible on a large scale. I think we need to focus on a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and Australia's definitely leading the way in a lot of this stuff in addressing pH issues, sodicity, fertility, and other soil constraints, be it boron or chlorides, whatever. We need. There's some low-hanging fruit there that some of it's easy to address, some isn't, but all of them will lead to increased plant available water capacity in soils if they're fixed. Farmer education about the importance of knowing our soils. As Andrew just mentioned, like setting up local champions, I see is essential. We do have the tall poppy syndrome, unfortunately, in Australia, and we need to get ourselves around that and just start putting some people up on a pedestal and saying, you know, let's fund these guys, let's help these guys, and let's show it off. This can improve productivity and improve the value of the industry. And we need to fund research to plug knowledge gaps, particularly in our soil characterisations that we do have, and things like the NIR testing, so that we've got more samples in the global soil library. But farmers do learn best from farmers, so as an industry we just need to get these things happening, and we need to demonstrate the dollar gain or savings possible from better data. Implementation at home, we've done 2 hectare grid sampling for pH variability and addressed most of that. We're now on our second round of liming for pH correction. We've got the entire farm mapped with AM38, which is giving us some indication of our soil zone differences. We're using regular satellite NDVI imagery, which is normalised differential vegetation index. So that's every time we have a clear day and the satellite passes over, we get an updated image to show us how our crops are progressing. And that particularly gives you an indication of biomass and crop health. And then we've got the harvest yield mapping. I think as a nation, what I've noticed is we're comparatively advanced with our level of data collection compared to many other farmers around the world. The Brazilians were growing some massive crops, but poor guys had basically no connectivity. They were pretty remote in the Mato Grosso, and their ability to do anything with the data was very limited. You know, there's a lot of advancement available there, but we're already collecting some highly productive data sets from our fields to help close the yield gap. The next step, I think, I'd like to trial some of this NIR or EC penetrometer work, or actually see it trialled locally. Mike Wallenberg's bringing his gear to Australia, and we need to see some more work done on that. We need some robust economic scrutiny on how much lack of knowledge is costing us and what can be gained by improving. Profit from PA has been a question mark for a while. There's been a lot of money spent by a lot of farmers in the last 20 years on PA. I remember the first 2 tractors we set up with Beeline auto steer. I think it cost us $120,000 per tractor, and we basically threw them in the bin 3 years later, as that $240,000 was no longer usable. So yeah, we need to find some decent income coming back from precision ag. But we also, I need to get in and drive some local research and adoption, and I think one of the greatest strengths of the Nuffield is the voice that it gives to us as scholars. We're funded by industry, and returning value to investors is key to the continued success of the scholarship program. So an aha moment for me. I think I was somewhere between airports on one of my 48 flights, and Brian Granshaw, 2012 scholar, tweeted a blog of his. I went, gee whiz, that sort of looks like what I've been looking for. Anyway, Trimble now have the soil information system. It's using multiple EM, EC, hydraulic conductivity and penetrometer. Combines lots of things to essentially draw a plant available water map. They've just released a broadacre version of this, which is on a 30 by 30 metre grid, which is 9 samples per hectare, which is very intense in our scale of things. Most of my paddocks are 800 hectares, so 9 8, that's 7,200 samples per field. That's pretty high res for me. Not cheap, but you know, we need to evaluate this stuff. Land prices are going up. We need to drive more money out of them. If it's $60 a hectare and it's going to add, you know, over a 10-year period, $100 a hectare, then we'll need to think about it. So, yeah, something to be looked at. So in closing, I think to optimise yield, we really do need to match our inputs to our potential. The only way we can do that is to get more data and more knowledge. Yeah, I think we know more about space than we know about our subsoils. And yeah, moisture knowledge is critical. So yeah, what are we willing to pay for it? Thank you.